This Day in Sports History. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. How often do you think about your soap? Well, if you answered, not much, maybe you should. You see, a lot of what passes for soap in stores is technically not soap, according to the FDA's definition. It's full of lab-created chemicals and detergents because it's cheaper to make. Now, what if you could buy natural soap made from natural ingredients like tallow, palm oil, coconut oil, and scented with essential oils, and for just a little bit more than you'd pay for grocery store soap? Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne, there's a product and a scent for just about everybody. Check them out for yourself at sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. There's more information and more podcasts to be found at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's January 8th, and on this day in 2011, the ground shook in Seattle. But it wasn't because of tectonic plates rubbing together. Instead, it was Marshawn Lynch who was responsible for
Beast Quake.
This was a wild card matchup. New Orleans was in Seattle. Now, the Saints were probably a little bit confused about why they had to travel to the West Coast. At 11-5, they finished second to the Falcons in the NFC South, and they were the 5 seed. The Seahawks, on the other hand, had won the NFC West at 7-9, and they were the 4. Seattle became the first team with a losing record to make the playoffs in a non-strike year. The Saints were 10-point favorites, which was the first time that a road playoff team was favored by more than a touchdown, and we'll talk about the second one in a few minutes. Seattle had built up an 11-point lead in the second half, but the Saints were mounting a comeback. After a field goal with a little over 5 to play in the game that cut the Seahawks' advantage to 4, Seattle was faced with a 2nd and 10 from their own 33. And this was the calm before the storm, or the quiet before the quake.
Crowd silent now, as opposed to when the Saints had the ball. Oh, look at this run! What a run! Marshawn Lynch! Still on his feet! Has blockers now! He's dancing his way for the touchdown!
The play call was simply 17 power, and it was initially stuffed at the line of scrimmage by Saints linebacker Scott Shanley. But he couldn't make the tackle, and then Lynch went full-on beast mode after breaking that tackle, breaking another 7 on his way to the end zone. The crowd noise and the jumping up and down of all those at Quest Field that night registered as a small tremor at a nearby Pacific Northwest seismic network station. And just like other seismic events, this was followed up by others. Beast Quake 2.0 occurred in 2014, and there have been a few during Seattle Sounders games. The latest crowd-causing earth tremor happened last July on both the 22nd and the 23rd, when Taylor Swift's Eras tour came through. According to seismologists, Taylor's Swifties created a tremor twice as great as the original Beast Quake on this day in 2011. On this day in 2000, it was the Music City Miracle. It's a great ending to watch again and again, unless, of course, you are a Buffalo Bills fan, in which case you probably label the ending to this one the Immaculate Deception or the Forward Lateral. This was an AFC wildcard game, and the Tennessee Titans entered the game after finishing the regular season with a 13-3 record and were in the playoffs for the first time since 1994. Buffalo was 11-5 with a roster full of playoff-hardened veterans. The Titans took control early in this one, and when they went to the locker room at halftime, they were up 12-0. But the Bills got their offense back on track in the second half, and when Steve Christie kicked a go-ahead 41-yard field goal with 20 seconds remaining in the game, Buffalo led 16-15, and it looked like a certainty that the Bills would end the Titans' postseason hopes, unless something miraculous could happen. On the call that day for the Tennessee Titans radio network were Mike Keith and Pat Ryan.
Do the Titans have a miracle left in them in what has been a magical season to this point? If they do, they need it now. Christie kicks it high and short. Going to be fielded by Lorenzo Neal at the 25. Pitches it back to Wycheck. He throws it across the field to Dyson. He's got something. 30, he's got 40, something. 50. He's got it. 40. He's got it. 20. 10. He's got it. End zone. Touchdown Titans. There are no flags on the field. It's a miracle. Tennessee has pulled a miracle. A miracle for the Titans.
It was a play they had worked on in practice that they called Home Run Throwback. It was designed by special teams coach Alan Lowry, who'd been a receivers coach for the team before being fired, and then he was brought back by Jeff Fisher to coach the special teams, and that seemed to work out pretty well. A couple of other things about this play: Isaac Byrd and Derek Mason had both been part of the mix when they practiced it. But Mason was injured and he was not on the field, and when the kick turned out to be high and short instead of a squibber, Byrd was not in the right place. And Dyson? Well, he never even practiced the play, but got some last-minute instructions just before going on the field. Of course, the controversy surrounded the throwback, or the supposed lateral from Wycheck to Dyson. After a long look, referee Phil Luckett came back with his decision.
After reviewing the play, the ruling on the field stands. It was a lateral.
The Tennessee Titans won the game and went on to play in Super Bowl 34 that season, coming up just a little bit short, and I mean that quite literally, against the St. Louis Rams. Buffalo, on the other hand, would wait 20 years before they made the playoffs again. Sadly, the man who threw the lateral in the game, Frank Wycheck, passed away after he fell in his home in December of 2023. On this day in 2012, it was another fantastic, albeit brief, finish to an AFC wildcard playoff game. This was the Denver Broncos and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, how you classified the AFC West that year really depends on your perspective. You could say there was a lot of parity, with three teams finishing at 8-8, with the Broncos winning the division by virtue of wins over common opponents. Or you could simply say that the AFC West was the weakest division in football, with Denver fortunate to be in the playoffs with a .500 record. On the flip side, the AFC North was stout, with both the Ravens and the Steelers finishing the regular season 12-4, with Pittsburgh relegated to the wild card game. And with the Broncos riding a 3-game losing streak into the playoffs, it was no wonder that Pittsburgh was favored. But not just by a few points. The Steelers were favored by 8. And this is the game that is the second time in league history that a road playoff team was favored by more than a touchdown. In this one, the Steelers led 6-0 after the first quarter after a pair of Sean Swisham field goals. The Broncos got their horses in gear in the second, with Tim Tebow hitting Eddie Royal for a 30-yard touchdown, and then Tebow ran one in later in the quarter. Those touchdowns were followed by a pair of Matt Prater kicks, and the Broncos were on top 20-6 at half. The Steelers clawed their way back into the game little by little, despite Ben Roethlisberger hobbling on an injured ankle. Under 4 minutes to play, the Steelers were down a touchdown, but they were able to find the end zone on this play. Here's Jim Nantz calling the game for CBS that day.
Got the time. Now runs out of the pocket, goes to the end zone. For the touchdown, Jericho Cotchery able to hold on to it from 31 yards out.
That tied it up, and between Tebow's inaccuracy and Roethlisberger's immobility, the game went to overtime, tied at 23. The referee's explanation of the playoff rules and the coin toss took longer to deliver than the game's winning points. Seriously, it took Ron Winter 45 seconds to explain the rules and then flip the coin. The Broncos won the toss and then ended it on the first play.
And here we go. First snap of the overtime. The Broncos have been in 3 overtime games this year. They won them all. Got him at the 40. It's Thomas at the 50. Stiff arm got him free to the 30, to the 20. Thomas to the 10. Denver's going on to New England. They win it on the first play of overtime.
Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. And as I alluded to earlier, Tebow was not overly accurate in this game, but he was efficient, completing 10 of 21 passes for 316 yards. Demaryius Thomas, who'd missed a portion of the regular season with a broken finger, caught 4 passes for 204 yards, and he capped it with his 80-yard TD catch in overtime. The Broncos would come back to reality the following week when they traveled to New England and got destroyed 45-10. On this day in 1955, Kentucky lost a basketball game, and it was stunning for several reasons. Georgia Tech entered Memorial Stadium on the Wildcats campus winless in the 3 games they'd played that season, and in the previous 75 games that Wack Hyder had coached, his Yellow Jackets had won only 16 of those. On the other side, Kentucky had won all 7 of their games so far in 55. They had a 32-game winning streak, and they had not lost at home in 12 years. Now, whether it was hubris or a matter of logistics, Kentucky regarded Tech so lightly that they did not even scout them. Heck, they'd beaten Georgia Tech 28 consecutive times going back to 1940, so you can kind of understand that. With about 1 minute and 30 seconds to play in this one, the Wildcats were up 3 points, 58-55. But they would not score again. Instead, Tech found a way to score 2 more baskets in the final 90 seconds, and they stunned the 8,500 who'd stuffed their way into the gymnasium and the 12 sitting on Kentucky's bench. Tech played only 5 guys the entire game, never substituting. Coach Hyder was not surprised by his team's win, but he did figure that when folks in Atlanta read the next day's paper, they'd think the score was a misprint, saying, quote, "They probably won't believe that score down in Atlanta, especially since we got beat by Sewanee our last time out. But you know, I've said that this bunch could beat any given club on any given night." Georgia Tech's win snapped Adolph Rupp and Kentucky's home winning streak at 129 games, with their last loss on campus happening in January of 1943. The 129 home win streak is still the NCAA record, and it really has not been approached. Strange thing, Tech would win only 2 of their next 8 games. But when Kentucky visited Atlanta for the rematch later in the month, Tech beat them again. Since we're talking about collegiate athletics, this has been a significant day over the course of the last 100 years, with the NCAA folks gathering for their annual convention around this time. On this day in 1972, the NCAA finally granted incoming freshmen the ability to play basketball and football. Now, the argument that had denied freshmen the ability to play prior to this was that they were not ready physically or mentally. Discussions had been going on for a while, stretching back to when Wilt Chamberlain was at Kansas, but you can credit the maturity and the dominance of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who'd graduated in 1970, and the way that Bill Walton had dominated the college basketball scene at UCLA at this point, for really being the catalysts to bringing folks back to the table and getting this passed, because it was obvious that the old way of thinking was not necessarily correct. And on this day in 1984, the NCAA voted to expand the postseason basketball tournament field to 64 teams. What had started as a 6-team event back in 1939 grew through the following decades, and whenever quality teams were left out of the postseason tournament, the cry went up to expand the field. In 1982, the tournament field expanded from 32 to 48 teams, then it went to 52 in 83, 53 in 84, and then the first iteration with 64 teams would happen in 1985. And in 1977, American tennis player Roscoe Tanner won his first and only Grand Slam event of his career by defeating Argentina's Guillermo Vilas in straight sets in the finals of the Australian Open. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. There is a crater on Mars named for Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry. There's also an asteroid somewhere in our solar system named 4659 Roddenberry. Hey, this is Steve White, the host of This Day in Sports History. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the episode or you're a fan of the podcast, can I ask you to do me a favor? I made the shortlist for the best sports talk podcast in 2024, and I can use all the help that I can get. I put a link in the show notes that will take you to the page, and if you have a moment, click that link and cast your vote for my podcast. I would certainly appreciate it. Thanks to all of those who have voted. And again, thanks for listening. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fans. We've got some exciting news to share with you. 6 of our podcasts from the Sports History Network have made it to the final round of voting for the prestigious Sports Podcast Awards. Here are their shows and the categories. Historically Speaking Sports and This Day in Sports History are both competing for Best Sports Talk Podcast. No Nonsense Old School Weightlifting History is in the running for Best Fitness, Health, and Wellbeing Podcast. When Football Was Football is up for Best Sports Documentary Podcast. Wrestling with Heels On has entered the ring for Best Wrestling Podcast. And Shoulder Roll Virtual Boxing is fighting for the title for Best Combat Sports Podcast. Now, of course, we need your help to take home the championship for each of these awesome shows. All you gotta do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/vote and cast your vote for your favorite shows. Or better yet, all 6 of them. Again, every vote counts, and we gotta show the world how much sports history really matters. So thank you for your support and making Sports History Network the headquarters for sports yesteryear. But again, don't wait. You gotta go vote now. That's over at sportshistorynetwork.com/vote.